Let me ask you this. I was actually talking with someone the other day, and we were saying, okay, who's the best quarterback in the NFC? And Matthew Stafford's name kind of came up without even thinking about it a whole lot.
You're tuned in to the Ross Tucker Football Podcast, guiding your gridiron journey, none other than your host, former NFL lineman, Ross Tucker.
Oh, yeah, it is. But it's not just any Ross Tucker Football Podcast. That's because it's a teaching tutorial Thursday, presented, of course, by DraftKings. Love the support that we get for the entire network, even money, college draft, fantasy feast, from our friends over at DraftKings. Please, especially when you're going to bet some golf this weekend, U.S. Open or NBA Finals, Stanley Cup Final, just use the code ROSS on the DK Sportsbook app or the DK Horse app or the regular DraftKings app if you're playing best ball, where we're still accepting entries for people that want to get into the best ball draft with me and Joe Dolan. Check us out on social media. The show is at Ross Tucker Pod on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. I'm at Ross Tucker NFL on all of those outlets, as well as TikTok. Posted a cool Tom Brady video that I think you guys would like. The world's most intense person is how I will phrase that video. Talked about Tom a little bit later on in the show, now that he got inducted to the Patriots Hall of Fame and his number 12 jersey is retired. It is a Thursday, which means Greg Cosell from NFL Films is in the house. It also means we're continuing our series previewing all of the teams heading in to training camp, which has really been a fun series to get Greg's thoughts on all of these teams. We got the NFC West today. It's Big Show time.
The Big Show.
Okay, so Greg, we're going to get into the NFC West, but before we do, anytime there's some guys in the news, I kind of want to get your opinion on them. And I guess I'll start 3 different tight ends, very different tight ends in the news this week. Darren Waller retired. Juwan Johnson got hurt, and it doesn't sound real good, the Saints tight end. And then Marcedes Lewis, Greg. I'll talk about more on my opinion a little bit later. 19th year, age 40. And I don't want to steal your thunder, Greg, but for most of his career, he's been arguably the best blocking tight end in the NFL. And he's kind of been talking with coaches for teams he's played for. They look at him as a difference maker with some of the blocks he's able to get done at that position that most tight ends cannot.
Yeah, and the reason for that, Ross, and you know this, having played in the league for, 7, 8 years, is that if you have a tight end that can block defensive ends or outside linebackers like a TJ Watt type, those kinds of players, one-on-one, you know how critical that is to a run game. And that's what Marcedes Lewis can do. And that's why he can still play in the league. Because even though we always talk about a passing league, explosive plays, you still have to run the ball at some point. And every team wants to have a tight end, if possible. And there's not that many, coming out of college anymore because of what the college game produces. But if you have a tight end, George Kittle comes to mind, which is one reason the 49ers run game is so good. If you have a tight end that can block those edge defenders, some of those DNs are 270, 280 pounds. If you have a tight end that can do that one-on-one, that opens up so much in your run game. And I'm sure you can speak to that as well.
Yeah, and you know what? It's interesting, Greg. Most of the time, tight ends at the point of attack are where runs go to die. They just are. A lot of times those guys get abused. If they're part of a double team at the point of attack, then they have a chance, right? If they're working with the tackle, or maybe it's a tight end and an H-back. But I can't tell you how many times I go back, Greg, to when I was in Buffalo, and we would try to run the ball and against New England, and whether it was Willie McGinnis or Mike Vrabel, they would annihilate, Greg, our tight ends. So any play where you're running zone to the right or the left, if the outside linebacker just crushes the tight end's collarbone right there and sets the edge, it's like dominoes and everything kind of like gets stacked up. And we come back to the huddle. I got my guy. Well, then why do we get no yards? Everybody's saying they got their guy and we got no yards. There aren't that many guys that can do it. But if you can do it one-on-one, like Marcedes Lewis can do it, it almost gives you an extra gap. Because then your tackle can block somebody else, your H-back or your lead fullback, like a use check, can go up on the strong safety. It kind of gives you an extra gap if you have that, which is why Marcedes Lewis might have a job as long as he still wants
one. Right. Well, and you're 100% right. Those drive and base blocks. We're not talking about down blocks. We're not talking about combo double teams, as you said. We're talking about drive and base blocks, where you've got to move someone and create space. You just made a great point. If that tight end cannot move that edge defender, and you mentioned two of the best who've ever done it as edge defenders in McGinnis and Vrabel, but there's guys like that in the league always. If you can't move those guys and they just squeeze inside, there's no gap, there's no hole, and then backs have to bounce, and we know what happens when backs have to bounce in the NFL.
I've also seen plays, Greg, where Marcedes Lewis can block those guys pretty decently one-on-one in pass pro. You wouldn't want to major in that, but it's just a change up in the protection. It's like a baseball pitcher, right? If every once in a while you have a 7-man protection and the tight end doesn't release, he just blocks, TJ Watt just blocks, they're not expecting that. So if he can handle that, it's just like anything else. It just gives him some variety.
And it helps shot plays. Shot plays are usually 6 or 7-man protection concepts, and you want your tight end to be able to block one-on-one in those situations. And that's how teams run shot plays between the 40s. You know, they go max pro, and they usually have 2 routes that are of vertical nature, and that's what teams do.
It's a really good point. Meanwhile, on the flip side, we've got, in every way, we got Darren Waller retiring at age 31.
It's a shame.
After 8 years.
Yeah.
And, man, he had a couple years there, Greg, where it felt like he was uncoverable.
Yeah, it's a shame, Ross, because he started to get hurt his last couple of seasons. But he had those couple of years, because don't forget, he was a wide receiver coming out of Georgia Tech, but he was in that option offense, so he wasn't a highly targeted player. Then he gained some weight and became a tight end, and he was one of those tight ends that every team is looking for, that you can line up as the single receiver to the short side of the field, and he can win one-on-one versus safeties, even versus some corners because of his size and his movement ability. Those guys are fun to watch. And it's just a shame, you know, obviously he made a decision that's best for him, but the last couple of years he was just hurt too much, and you weren't really able to see the traits and the athleticism that he has.
The last tight end I wanted to ask you about is Juwan Johnson, another former receiver, a guy that went to Penn State, then Oregon. And it seems like he settled into a kind of a nice role there with the Saints. All I saw was from Nick Underhill saying that he could be out for a while. That would not be good, Greg. It feels like he's a guy that Derek Carr likes.
Yeah, it doesn't sound good. I read the same thing, you know, and there's no official report yet, but it doesn't sound good. But I always liked him. You know, he was not a high-volume target. Obviously, you know, they were trying to figure out exactly what to do with him, but former receiver, he can run the seam. He can run vertical-type routes. To me, he was a guy that, and again, you know, I'm not there every day, obviously, so I don't know how they structure their offense, but he just struck me as a guy that could have a larger role if you really get your offense set the way you want it to be. And I think they were probably looking for him to be a pretty significant part this season. We'll see. But because of his wide receiver background, he was a wide receiver in college, but he was always big. He became a tight end, but he has the kind of ability that he can really help a pass game because there's a vertical element to what he is.
Greg, let's dive into the NFC West and continue with this series. We'll just go alphabetical order and start with the Arizona Cardinals, year 2 for Jonathan Gannon. They got some new weapons now.
Yeah, they sure do. I mean, you know, and they've got a quarterback that, you know, I think we've always felt that there was a lot there from a talent perspective, and that we always felt that, hey, there's more there to come out. Maybe it's going to start to come out. Obviously second year with the new head coach and a new coordinator. Obviously they drafted Marvin Harrison. I really liked Michael Wilson, who was a third-round pick a year ago out of Stanford. I think he can be a really solid receiver as well. I like their backs. I like Connor, and they drafted Trey Benson, who I thought was a really good prospect. This is a pretty intriguing offense. And the thing about Kyler Murray, and we know that this is where the league is going now, and he's very much that kind of quarterback. He can beat you from the pocket, and he can beat you outside of structure. And I think we're all waiting for him to really become a sort of dominant quarterback. I'm not going to sit here and say he's going to become a top 3 quarterback in the league, but he has all kinds of traits. And maybe second year now, he got hurt a year ago, second year in this system with this group. I think he has a chance to develop into a really good player. And you probably remember from when we did our draft series that I really love Marvin Harrison. So this is a pretty interesting team on offense.
Defensively, Greg, I mean, they were pretty decent last year, despite the fact they had very little talent.
They did really cool stuff.
I did the Ravens-Cardinals game, and I said to Gannon before the game, I said, I said, Jonathan, how many of your guys would have started for the Eagles last year? 2, maybe? And I was thinking Kaiser White and Budda Baker, and he had said 3, Kaiser White, Budda Baker, and they were getting Jalen Thompson back that week, but not many. Not many. And they were decent to have only 3 guys that would even start for the Eagles. Pretty good.
Well, he did some really cool stuff. It's hard to really explain it because you almost have to see it, but he did some really cool stuff on the back end. The way he played almost like 3 across with his safeties and put Budda. He basically took his slot corner and lined him up as part of a 3 across at quarters depth, about 8 yards off the line of scrimmage. Budda Baker would often play in the middle, and he'd kind of react to what he saw because he's that kind of player. So he did some really interesting things conceptually, and I'm sure he did it because he was lacking the talent to just line up and play. They did draft with their first, obviously after Marvin Harrison, their next 2 picks were defensive players. Darius Robinson, the DN from Missouri, who is an old school big DN, strong man, country strong. And then Max Melton, the corner from Rutgers, who I think they would probably like to start on the outside because that was a position of clear weakness a year ago. But Gannon's a sharp guy. He does a lot of cool things on the defensive end.
Speaking of cool stuff, Greg, if you want to take things to the next level this upcoming weekend, drink some Labatt Blue Lights with your friends. Live life to the power of we. Always enjoy responsibly beer. Labatt USA, Buffalo, New York. We move on, Greg, to the L.A. Rams. I thought it was one of Sean McVay's best coaching jobs last year. Very impressive what they were able to get done. That playoff game against the Lions was awesome. Yeah. What's next, though, Greg? What's next for this group?
Yeah, I mean, they've got a pretty solid team. Obviously, they lost Aaron Donald, and that's big. That's really big because he dictated the way offenses had to play. I mean, both in the run game and in pass protection. They obviously lost Raheem Morris as well, who's now the head coach of the Falcons. But Chris Shula has been there for years and years and years. My guess is you won't see them conceptually different on the defensive side of the ball. Their first 2 picks were defensive players, both out of Florida State. 2 guys whose college tape was very, very impressive. Jared Verst, who's a DN/outside linebacker, and Braden Fisk, who's kind of a DN/D tackle. Both guys really had impressive tape. Offensively, they're going to be good. I mean, let me ask you this. I was actually talking with someone the other day, and we were saying, okay, who's the best quarterback in the NFC? And Matthew Stafford's name kind of came up without even thinking about it a whole lot. And I've actually, in the last week or so, watched a bit of their offense again, just to kind of, that's what I do in the off season. I kind of pick things just randomly to watch. Matthew Stafford's a really, really good quarterback. And their offense is really multiple with the pass game. Stafford's a major part of that, but obviously so is McVay and what he does. Nakua was really good last year. It was a really, he does so many good things, McVay, with his formations, the reduced splits, the motions. It really helps receivers become major factors who may not be, top 2 or 3 receivers. Nakua had a great year, but no one's going to say he's Jefferson or Chase or Devontae Adams or Tyreek Hill. But, what he does with his formations and his splits, it's really difficult to defend. It puts a lot of pressure on defenses. And Stafford's just a veteran quarterback who sees it, and he can go through full field reads. He can do anything. And they had a really solid run game. Kyron Williams, again, another guy, not necessarily a high level traits guy, but the way they run their offense, very effective. And then they drafted Blake Corum in the 3rd round, who probably fits this offense as well. So they're going to be good on offense.
There's no doubt about that. I have so much respect for the physicality with which they played, in particular their receivers.
Yes,
Puka Nacua is like leading up on ISOs and rocking linebackers.
Yep.
I have a huge affinity for the way that McVay is able to get those guys to play. And honestly, Greg, they remind me a lot in that regard of the San Francisco 49ers. You know, obviously McVay and Shanahan spent a lot of time on Mike Shanahan's staff together in Washington. That leads us to the 49ers, who almost feels like they have kind of an embarrassment of riches right now when you look at what they have, especially on the offensive side of the ball.
Yeah, and I think we know they'll be good on offense. I mean, that's not really, I don't think there's a lot of brilliant stuff to say here. Obviously, they drafted Ricky Pearsall in the 1st round, and I think he fits them extremely well. The receiver that I really liked, that was a 4th round pick, was Jacob Cowing. Now, he came out of Arizona, but prior to that, he was at UTEP. And at UTEP, he was a big-time vertical dimension. He's got great speed. I'm not going to sit here and say that he's Jalen Waddle, but I thought there were elements of his style. Again, it's style. It's not a direct comparison, but he is a shorter receiver who can run. And Juwan Jennings is someone I've always loved. Talking about blocking, you were talking about Nacua. Jennings is a very similar type player, and they re-signed him. The big question will be on defense. They have a new D coordinator, Nick Sorensen. Obviously it did not work out with Steve Wilkes in their mind because it did not take long after the season for him to be released. They drafted Renardo Green from Florida State, a corner, in the 2nd round. I really loved his tape. Physical, competitive. Florida State was a high percentage man coverage defense. So he's had a ton of experience the last 2 years playing man, playing press man. They obviously felt they needed to be better on the outside, so now they can move Lenore inside where he's probably at his best. And we know, I tell you, one player they signed who I think, and I don't know how, he's only going to play in their base, I'm sure, but I've always thought Devondre Campbell was one of those really solid pros. Now, I don't think he was as good a year ago. He's getting up there in years, and he was hurt. But, in a sense, he'll be their 3rd linebacker. He won't play. Of course, Greenlaw's coming off, I guess, the Achilles, right? So Campbell could play a lot early because who knows about Greenlaw. But I thought that was a really kind of under-the-radar good signing.
So the last team we need to talk about, Greg, in this division, which is an interesting one as well, it's the Seattle Seahawks. For the first time in a long time, they have a new head coach in Mike McDonald, which also means they got a new OC. Ryan Grubb stays in the Seattle area. They've got a new defensive coordinator. I know from talking with you that you liked what Ryan Grubb did at Washington. I know you loved Mike McDonald and what he did in Baltimore. So this must be a team that you're excited to see this year.
Yeah, again, offensively, I'm really curious to see them because I thought Ryan Grubb for college football was really, really good at Washington with his intermediate and vertical route concepts, the kinds of things you don't see a ton of because there's so much air raid, those kinds of concepts. He was actually a vertical and intermediate guy in terms of how he designed his concepts. Obviously, Michael Penix did a great job with that, being a really good downfield thrower. Geno Smith can make those throws. They certainly have receivers who can work in that system in Metcalf, Lockett, and Smith-Njigba. So it's not as if they don't have the talent, Ross. They do. They have 2 good offensive tackles. They signed Laken Tomlinson, a really solid guard, I think, to really solidify that O-line. Defensively, it's Mike McDonald. And, not to get into a whole lengthy discussion getting into the weeds, but I think a critically important player for this defense, seeing what McDonald did in Baltimore a year ago, is going to be the nickel back Devin Witherspoon. Because what he did last year in Baltimore with Arthur Merlette and Kyle Hamilton, because he played a ton of slot. And again, I'm not comparing Witherspoon to Hamilton. They're different players, but the position is really important in what Mike McDonald does. And Witherspoon is a really good player, physical, competitive, feisty. I think he can do the things that are necessary from the slot that Mike McDonald wants done.
It is interesting because it feels like that is a playmaker position in Mike McDonald's defense.
Yes.
But
Yes.
Witherspoon and Hamilton have such different body types.
Right.
Well,
that's why I said they're not. You can't compare the players, but the position is really important, and I think Witherspoon can do a lot of those things.
Yeah, well, you can do everything, Greg. Every time you come on, I'm already looking forward to next week. We'll do the NFC North or South. I don't know. We'll figure out, see what happens next week, and pick one of those. NFC North or South should be fun. Thank you so much for the time, as always, Greg. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Ross. That was a lot of fun. Appreciate it.
We are just a few days away from Father's Day, which means most of you still haven't gotten the dads in your life anything. You got to launch this new box and make this your gift from our friends over at Good Ranchers. It's called the King Cut Box. How about this? 2 thick cut bone-in ribeyes, 4 center cut filet mignons, 2 thick cut bone-in New York strips. It's a feast for a king. It's called the King Cut Box. It's the perfect gift for Father's Day. Give it to your dad and then say that you want to eat with him. You want to have the steaks with him. You want to grill with him, because that's what they really want, right? They want time with their children. Again, it's goodranchers.com. It's the King Cut Box. They've even got a code for you guys, Ross, at checkout to claim your free Applewood smoked bacon for life. Change the way you buy meat today at goodranchers.com with my code Ross to claim your free bacon for life, and they support the Paralyzed Veterans of America. We love that too. Goodranchers.com, American meat delivered.
Tuck's Takes.
All right, Ross, probably the most surprising news from this offseason. The Patriots have inducted Tom Brady into their Hall of Fame, and they retire his number 12.
I'm sensing some sarcasm there, Jack.
Just a tad.
You're supposed to say good because I'm laying it on thick. What movie is that? I can't remember what movie that is. It's funny. I was invited to that last night, but was not able to go. Couple reasons. One is I'm with my family at the beach this week down at the Jersey Shore, and also I ended up doing an event for Westwood One at the New York offices for the NFL League office with Kevin Harlan yesterday. It's called an upfront, where you talk with potential advertisers and tell them how awesome advertising is on NFL games on Westwood One Radio. And it is, because Kevin and I, we talk about the advertisers, and he'll bring up friendlies. I'll be like, oh my gosh, I'm 1,000% stopping in the drive-thru on the way home, and I'm going to crush an extra large chocolate frosty. They're so good. They're still so good. Not a hashtag ad. Anyway, so I couldn't go to Brady's event last night, but it looked like it was a tremendous event. Obviously, extremely well deserving. Kudos to Tom, and really seemed like a special night.
So it popped in my head as you're talking. It's Tommy Boy is what that's from. Picking up on the sarcasm.
Yeah. Picking up on your sarcasm here. Good, because I'm laying it on thick. David Spade.
Something you guys mentioned earlier, tight end Marcedes Lewis, he signs with the Bears for his 19th season, age 40.
So the most interesting aspect of that, to me, is like the decision-making when you're that age to decide, yes, I still want to play another year of pro football. Because he's got bumps and bruises. It's taken a toll on his body. For him to still say, yep, I want to do it again. I mean, at this point, he better get 20 next year, right? Like you can't play 19 years. You cannot do that. That is too close. So I guess can I bet on DraftKings that Marcedes Lewis plays for somebody next year for at least 3 games, so it gets a 20th season? But man, I would love to go over. It can't be about the money at this point. He must just love it that much. Good for him.
Something else you mentioned earlier, tight end Saints Juwan Johnson. He suffered a leg injury and reportedly missed a lot of time.
Yeah, that didn't sound very good, and it's especially not good for a Saints team. This is obviously a big year for them on a lot of different levels. Not good at all that Juwan Johnson got injured this time of year. It doesn't seem like that happens as much as it used to, but still not a great sign for the Saints. We'll get some more information on that. There were some other news, Jack. Steven Nelson retiring after 9 years, the corner. Lions signed linebacker Ben Neiman. Eagles signed cornerback Perry Nickerson. Dolphins signed safety Marcus May. All these teams constantly tinkering with their roster, making sure it's where they want it to be going into training camp. We are exactly where we want to be going into next week. Should be an awesome week. Hopefully you guys check out the other shows over the next couple of days. I think we're done here.
Thanks for tuning in to the Ross Tucker Football. Make sure to also check out Even Money, Fantasy Feast, and College Draft, all on the DraftKings Network on Samsung TV Plus, YouTube, or subscribe to the podcast on your favorite platform.
Shout out myfrontpagestory.com. It's still the best Father's Day gift ever, and you can still get one. myfrontpagestory.com, and I would absolutely love to send you a signed autograph for doing so. We also have backofficeschedule.com, humanheadnyc.com, Sporticulture, Pizza Boy Brewing.